Hello and welcome back to all of our medicine families, earth protectors and climate justice activists. And welcome, of course, to Jojo and Zoe. Thanks so much for joining us today.
Thanks for having us.
Unfortunately, we had a Syra locked in for today. She couldn't make it for various reasons, but incredible synergy and synchronicity has kind of led us to hosting a rather auspicious session with Jojo and Zoe, offering an opportunity for them to announce some truly incredible, awe-inspiring, hope-injecting, and potentially biodiversity-saving news. So for the few of you that don't know, the Stop Ecocide campaign was founded in 2017, and their mission is to support the establishment of ecocide as an international crime in order to forbid and prevent the further devastation of life on Earth. And they're the only global campaign with the exclusive focus of this. And today we have this unexpected conversation surfacing right at the 11th hour to mark some amazing news from France this week. So President Macron, I believe I'm pronouncing it right, has announced that he will champion the establishment of an international crime of ecocide as a way to hold major polluters under account, under criminal law, which truly opens the way to legal protection of the earth, which is absolutely phenomenal. Undoubtedly the best news of the century, or the decade rather, potentially the century. And it's the last milestone of the global campaign to criminalise the destruction of ecosystems, and a campaign pioneered by inspirational UK barrister Polly Higgins, who sadly passed last year. And it would have been Polly's 52nd birthday yesterday, on the 4th of July, had you still been with us, which, this huge announcement wasn't enough, and the session wasn't synergistic enough, then that's the icing on the cake. So, yeah, we have with us today environmental activist Jojo Mehta, co-founder and now key spokeswoman for the Stop Ecocide campaign. And Jojo will be in conversation with Zoe Tryon, renowned activist and speaker in her own right. Known for her work with indigenous communities, particularly in the Amazon, Zoe founded One of the Tribe, a non-profit organisation to raise awareness for the issues facing indigenous communities. She's lived and worked with a huge amount of indigenous communities across Ecuador, supporting education, health, economic, capacity building projects, and advocating for environmental and constitutional rights. And of course, she's also worked closely with indigenous partners on the largest environmental lawsuit in history, which is phenomenal. So we've got some amazing company tonight. And these two actually met last year at our ambassador gathering, which is incredible. Jojo was giving an amazing speak, and inevitably they had a huge amount to talk about. So as I said, very auspicious that you're joining us here today. I'll hand it over to you guys. But first of all, I wanted to ask the really broad and huge question of I guess, how did this come about? And of course, what does this news potentially mean for the future of the planet? And with that, over to you guys.
Well, thanks, Zach. That's quite a big question to start off with. And when he says, how does this happen? What Zach's referring to, of course, is President Macron's announcement from earlier this week. And that came in response to a whole bunch of proposals that were put together by a citizens' assembly in France. Now, you may recall last year that France was having issues with trying to raise the price of fuel, and there was a lot of protests known as the Gilets jaunes. And the government's response was ultimately to say, okay, you don't like what we're doing, put yourselves as citizens' assembly together, we'll do it by random selection and come up with some policies to deal, to tackle climate change. And the foremost proposal that the assembly came up with, and this was a couple of weeks ago that this was voted on and became part of their proposal to the government, was a crime of ecocide. They basically demanded that the French government legislate for ecocide. And so the week following that, it was a kind of week of incredible anticipation. How is Macron going to respond to this? And then on the Sunday just before, so on the 28th of June, so last Sunday, a week ago today, there was a great wave of Green successes in the French elections, which meant that Macron was kind of in a way doubly cornered by both his Citizens' Assembly and the fact that, you know, there were a lot of mayorships across France that were going to the Greens. And so this announcement of his, in a way, was, you know, it was inevitable that something positive was going to come out of this. But it's been so exciting that he's actually gone as far as saying, you know, he will champion this on behalf of France on the international stage. So that's incredibly exciting. And actually, Zoe was one of the first people that I pinged the news to. How did you feel when you got that message?
I mean, I was so excited. I was like, is this a joke? Like, this is just so wonderful. I mean, I know we're in the middle of a great awakening time right now. So it was like, oh my goodness, this is, to me, it was like a real sign that it gave me such hope. Do you know what I mean? That things are moving in the right direction. I'm so excited.
Absolutely, and it feels like it's been such a long time coming. You know, this campaign to establish ecocide as an international crime, you know, was carried forward by the co-founder of the Stop Ecocide campaign, my dearest friend Polly Higgins, who passed away last year, sadly after a very short battle with a serious cancer. But you know, she had been talking about it for 10 years, the last 10 years of her life, and she would of course be absolutely delighted to hear what's happening now. And you know, Zoe and I got talking about this. It was actually, if I remember right, it was actually the first thing we sort of realised that we had in common was this. You know, we both knew Polly. We actually got talking because our two daughters started hanging out together, didn't they, at the Ambassador. Yeah. Meeting last year, and yeah. Zoe's girl was kind of following my daughter around and going, oh, it's an older girl, she's so cool, and we got chatting, and it turned out that Zoe had actually met Polly. Where was it that you met Polly?
So I met Polly in London many years ago, and we met for a tea, and like many people, you know, anyone who's listening who's met Polly, she can change your life in an instant. She was the most incredibly inspiring woman, and she just listened in such a way and asked you such brilliant questions that you came to your truth and wanted to, you know, battle to the ends of the earth to sort of support things. And we were talking about the Amazon, of course, and I've been working, you know, supporting the case against Chevron as much as I could, and was exhausted because I just said to, you know, Polly, the environmental laws are there, like we have them, but they just don't work. And you know, and I was very disillusioned and depressed and sad because I'd seen such horrific things going on in the Amazon, and I believed in law. You know, I believed that if you went down the right track, then good would triumph in the end. So I was very naive, and I had this tea with Polly, and it was just, and she said that's exactly, you know, that's exactly why she was creating these ecocide laws, because the environmental laws just weren't supporting nature. They weren't working, you know, and they weren't working globally. And you know, the case against Chevron, the indigenous people won against Chevron, which was this enormous lawsuit, an $18 billion lawsuit just to clean up. And Chevron to this date has not paid $1 to clean up. And they've battled all over the world to prevent that. So if there were ecocide laws in place, you know, this wouldn't have happened, you know, and they're so important. I mean, Steve Donziger, who was the lead lawyer on the case against Chevron, has been on house arrest now for nearly a year for contempt of court, which would be a maximum sentence if he did do it of 6 months. And he hasn't even gone to court. It's unprecedented because these huge, you know, oil companies are trying to crush any human rights lawyer or any action that can bring them down. So they're putting the full weight of their power to crush Steve Donziger, so that any, you know, law student goes, well, I'm not touching human rights law, or I'm not touching environmental law, because they'll just destroy me, because they have destroyed Steve. So this is why when I spoke to Polly and, you know, and I heard about ecocide law, it just made, as it does to everybody, it makes such sense on a deep level. You know, we cannot have peace on the earth until we have peace with the earth. It's that, you know, it's that simple, I think.
Absolutely, and I think the difference that ecocide law can make compared to with the huge body of environmental law, which is mostly in the civil arena, it's mostly regulation. The difference that ecocide law can make is that it gives individual criminal responsibility. So effectively it means that those people in positions of superior responsibility, so CEOs, government ministers, financiers potentially, could be held individually criminally liable to prosecution for permitting or causing serious damage and destruction to the earth. And that is how we conceive of ecocide. So when Polly first defined it to the UN Law Commission in 2010, what she called it was extensive loss, damage and destruction of ecosystems, to the extent that inhabitants, and she meant also not just human inhabitants, of that territory have their peaceful enjoyment severely diminished. So it was quite a broad definition, and it's kind of been our campaign working definition, and it's also been good enough for the Vatican. I mean, the Pope has, agreed with it last year and actually, requested a crime of ecocide and used the same definition that Polly did. And so it's essentially it's a concept that is quite far-reaching, and that many people told Polly that she would never be able to, she would never, accomplish, be able to see come into practice. Now, she's not actually with us to see the developments that are happening now, but she always retained this incredible persistence, that she knew that this was going to eventually come, and that she was absolutely single-minded about it. And she even recently, there's been a book published that was actually her last book that she wrote, and she called it Dare to be Great. And I think Zoe's read that, haven't you?
It's a brilliant book, and everybody must read it. It's a sort of, it's an activist's inspirational book. It's fantastic. Is there a link to it? Will there be a link to it underneath?
Yeah, actually, I hadn't thought of that beforehand. Zoe and I kind of got this opportunity about 12 hours ago, I think, to do this conversation. But I tell you what, I'm going to do a thing which you don't normally do when you're on these sort of video calls, which is I'm just going to back across to the other side of my office and get the book and wave it at you. So I'm going to do that. Russell, this is it here. So this is Dare to be Great, which I've written the new introduction for, and Polly wrote it back in 2014, and it was intended as an inspiration, because I think she understood that she had this incredibly inspirational quality, and she wanted to somehow make that have people be able to get in touch with that, without necessarily having met her. And actually, there's something about this book which is actually very like just having a conversation with Polly. So we sort of fully recommend that. And I think I sort of feel like, it's an interesting timing, as Zach said, inviting us to speak today, because it was Polly's birthday yesterday. 4th of July, obviously, is known in America as Independence Day. Polly used to call it Interdependence Day, because her whole kind of drive behind what she was doing was this concept of the unity of people and planet, was that this law effectively of simply forbidding serious destruction to nature has really had this potential to bring people into connection with nature and with the planet, which is something that I'm hoping Zoe will say a little bit more about later, because she's got a lot more experience of the indigenous cultures where that is very, very deeply understood, I believe. But I wonder if, just as a little sort of tribute to Polly, given that it was actually her birthday yesterday, I wonder if Zach could just play us that little video that we put together to sort of commemorate her. It's just called Greatness as a Legacy, and it's actually got Polly herself reading a section of the book. Zach, I'm not sure we're getting the audio on that.
No.
To act.
Give me 2 seconds.
This is what happens when you deal with technology last minute. We're just going to try that one again.
Even if we do not know where it will lead, and even when it's a setback.
Can we try going back to the beginning there?
Greatness as a legacy. Greatness as a legacy. When we truly believe that we can make a difference and are committed to effecting great change, giving up is not an option. If anything, it's those moments of crystallization that drives us forward each time. When we are committed to act, the setbacks drive us forward to an even higher gear, and the refusal to let go seeds within us a strength that cannot be surpassed. Every step we take, even if we do not know where it will lead, and even when it's a setback, is a step that leads us to a very different place. Being in service is a conscious decision to effect great change in one's lifetime for the greater good. How that is done arises out of the commitment. We all have unique gifts. Everything we require to help us discover what our exceptional gifts are can be found all around us. It's just that it's not always apparent. How often has it been that, with the benefit of hindsight, you have looked back and said of something upsetting that it was, in fact, a gift in disguise? Have you ever felt pushed when you did not want to move? And yet, now that you see, you can tell that it was very much for the best in the larger scheme of things. The challenge is to let go of the sense that whomever did the pushing acted unjustly. To bear the grudge is to remain enslaved to the desire to punish. It used to be thought that leaving a legacy was only for the realms of kings and popes. It's not a title that determines legacy, however. Each and every one of us leaves a legacy. A legacy that is truly great, however, speaks of fearlessness in the face of opposition, taking action even when in fear for something greater than the self, standing up and speaking out even when no one else will, setting a course that brings humanity closer to peace. That is a legacy that we can all commit to. It is also a legacy without attachment to outcome, for the long-term results may never be seen or understood in our lifetimes. Legacy to me speaks of intrinsic values made manifest. It is also for the future. What I can do in my lifetime so that long after I've gone, many whom I shall never meet shall live a life in greater peace. What do I choose to bequeath to the future? What is my legacy? What is yours?
Mm. Mm. It makes me want to cry every time I listen to that. She's so amazing. What if you had Jojo? People listening to that, it's like that's Polly. That's who she is, and that's, she's so inspiring and moving and spiritual, and that's what you get in the book. It's like meeting her, and it calls us to think of those questions, like what is our legacy and what do we want to leave behind? And so Jojo, how did you get involved in the Stop Ecocide campaign? What was it that sort of drew you into Polly's incredible sphere, and how did you two move forward and create this?
Wow, yeah, I mean, I think like you, I encountered her through being in the activist arena. I was involved in the anti-fracking community in the UK, and I'd just moved out of London with my family back to my hometown of Stroud, which is now quite well known for being the birthplace of the Extinction Rebellion. So we've got quite a radical reputation here these days. But yeah, so I came back to this area in 2011, and Polly actually moved out of London herself in 2014, also to this area. And at the time, she was putting together some papers and some information around a possible case on fracking. And she was looking for people to help her research it. And some mutual friends said, oh, you need to be in touch with Jojo. She knows all about that. She's involved in that. And it was one of those kindred spirit moments. It was, you know, from literally the first sort of afternoon that we spent working together, it was that kind of recognition of, oh my God, this woman works like I do. And, you know, we just absolutely clicked and basically worked together ever since. And that was in 2014. And we worked pretty closely together until, as I say, until she passed away last year on Easter Day last year. Again, with, you know, impeccable sense of timing. You know, everything Polly did seemed to coordinate with other things that were happening in the universe, in the world, you know, in these crazy ways. So yeah, it was quite an extraordinary moment. And it's interesting actually watching that little video again. The kind of the irony and the truth, if you like, of her saying, you know, you have to not be attached to the outcome because you may not see the outcome in your own lifetime. And of course, you know, when she was recording that, she had no idea of what was going to happen with her and her own health. And that is especially poignant now, seeing that or hearing that. I'm hoping our connection is still all right because I can see some little curly whirlies going around on my screen. So I'm trusting that we're still live and all right. Yeah, so it was quite a journey. And in the first couple of years, we didn't so much work publicly together because I was very much in the activist side and she was on the legal side. But then over the years, what Polly had found was that she was often told that this will never happen. There'll never be a crime of ecocide. You know, she couldn't get funding. NGOs didn't want to support her. Even a lot of lawyers said, you know, this is a really tough call. You know, are you really gonna do this? And she was absolutely determined. And I remember the moment when she actually came back from the US. I think it was in 2016 because she went out around the time when the Paris Agreement was signed. In April of 2016, or a lot of the first people to sign it signed it then. And, you know, she came back saying, you know, Jojo, this is not going to work. We're not going to get backing for this. We're going to have to we need to crowdfund it. If we want to take this work forward, this is going to have to be with the help of the people who believe in it. And so that's when we started kind of officially and publicly working together. And we launched the campaign together to raise funds to continue doing the work at the kind of legal and diplomatic level of taking it forward at the International Criminal Court. And that was ultimately successful. It, you know, that first launch of the campaign enabled us to go, you know, enable Polly to take a team to the International Criminal Court and to start working with and connecting with the small island states that we've been working with since then. So yeah, it's been quite a journey, is what I can say. And what I didn't realize, of course, and neither did Polly, is that those 4 years of working closely with her were actually a kind of intensive training.
Absolutely. And I mean, I remember hearing on a TED talk that, you know, she knew that it was like 850 million people shared her views on this, even though they didn't have voices. And I think it was, you know, there was 370 million indigenous peoples who saw the earth in the way that she saw it. And then she looked into Buddhist philosophy and she saw that, you know, the way that the Buddhists think about the earth is the same way. So she sort of, and I remember when we talked about that, she said, you know, that gave her, you know, even though, you know, knowing that there was millions and millions of people who did share her vision and her voice, even if, you know, they weren't, but by her side, that gave her impetus to carry on. And so, I mean, how's it been? You know, I know we've spoken a lot about this, but it's like, how do you keep carrying on? How do you keep hoping? Do you keep going after you lost your best friend and your co-founder of this? And what's it been like for you, sort of picking up the mantle personally? And how do you keep going?
Gosh, I mean, it's been quite a roller coaster of a year, I would say, and it's kind of perhaps a crazy thing to say, but I actually feel like I still have a working relationship with Polly. That might sound a bit odd, but she was always so incredibly practical and straightforward about what she was doing. And even when she got this crazy diagnosis and was given just a few weeks to live, her reaction was, she was never afraid. She was never upset. She simply said, what are we going to do about this? You know, how are we going to make this work? And, you know, she even said, you know, if this is what it takes to get the campaign noticed, well, maybe this is what's got to happen, and let's tell people. And of course, at the time, we had an extraordinary reaction. She had a big international following of you know, people saying this is terrible. What's going to happen to this work if Polly goes? And actually, in reality, what happened was that an awful lot of people stepped up and said to me, you know, let's carry this on. You know, let's take this forward. How are we going to? How can we help you do this? And so the simple answer, I guess, is you know, with a lot of help. And you know, we've now got an amazing team that were just, you know, when I was working with Polly, it was really the two of us and a few volunteers, and also some contact, obviously our international contacts, some international lawyers and diplomats and so on. But it was very kind of ad hoc. And now it's almost, I mean, it's, you know, it's kind of tragic in a way that it had to happen that way. But it was like, as the figurehead, when she was no longer there was suddenly a sense that people who might have been thinking, I don't need to do anything because Polly's doing it, actually then stepped up and said, well, actually, what can we do to help make this happen? And so there was a very sort of strong coming together of people who wanted to see the whole work continue. And I think the other thing that it's important to bring in is that this was something that, you know, that people in other countries have also been taking forward. Indeed, originally inspired by Polly. But for example, there's a group in Sweden, there was a group in France, led by an amazing activist, Valérie Cabanes, who had a lot to do with what's been happening in France over the last few weeks, and indeed years, in terms of raising the profile of ecocide over there. And so what I really feel like one of my main jobs has been doing is coordinating people and bringing people together and having the right people talk to each other to really sort of grow this as a movement, so that it's no longer, you know, the one very bright beacon, but actually a kind of global, you know, increasingly global, I suppose I should say, campaign. And this might be a good moment, perhaps, for Zach to play another little video. Actually, we've got a little video we've called "Can You Imagine," which just gives people, hopefully it'll give you as a bit of a perspective of how a law of ecocide fits in to the whole environmental, the area of environmental concern that so many people are working on in their own ways and in their own particular arenas. So Zach, if you wouldn't mind.
It would be pretty difficult, right?
I think you might have to take it back.
Can you imagine campaigning for human rights or social justice if mass murder and torture were legally permitted? It would be pretty difficult, right? If you're campaigning for environmental justice, climate justice, or the rights of nature, or if you're working in conservation at any level, this is exactly the problem you have, because serious harm to nature is permitted. Destroying ecosystems right now is not a crime. At the time of recording this, during the COVID-19 pandemic, many polluting activities are on pause. But as the UN's Environment Chief has pointed out, nature has issued a warning. Pandemics could become more frequent if we return to destructive business as usual, because commercial exploitation and destruction of natural habitats and ecosystems upsets nature's balance. Indeed, the climate and ecological crisis already unfolding is the direct result of such disturbance and damage, sustained over decades. It is therefore imperative that we seize this moment to adjust our baseline rules, our laws, to temper corporate behaviour towards nature in order to preserve and nurture life. There is no baseline rule that prohibits serious harm to nature, harm that has brought us to the brink we now stand on. There's a key piece of the jigsaw that is missing. A crime that is happening all around us and described in many different ways, but which has yet to be clearly named. even by many who confront it regularly. That crime is ecocide. Just imagine how much easier it would be to protect what we love and what supports life, from honeybees to chimpanzees, from rivers to rainforests, from fertile soil to living oceans, from food resilience to land stewardship, if it were a crime to destroy ecosystems. It would make all the difference. Even just using the term ecocide makes a difference. It highlights the agency that humans and especially corporations have. We are suffering a biodiversity crisis and ultimately a climate crisis because ecocide has been committed over decades. It should be a crime. And that's what we campaign for. Making ecocide an international crime. That's it. That's what we do. Ours is the only global campaign dedicated specifically to that. Most people don't even know it's possible, let alone that we're partway there. We're already working with international criminal lawyers to take this forward. We're already working with vulnerable states which are starting to call for it on the global stage. And when we succeed, everybody wins. Every campaign for every threatened species, every indigenous group fighting for ancestral lands and forests, every country struggling with toxic extractive industry, every ordinary human being wanting to leave a livable earth to their children. It all gets easier. It all starts to become possible. Making ecocide a crime really can change everything. So consider supporting our work as part of what you do. Ecocide law is an essential offering to the discussion of how we avoid returning to destructive business as usual as and when this pandemic is over. This is no longer just an idea whose time has come. It's the key missing piece to create a livable world. Join our public campaign at stopecocide.earth and sign up as an Earth Protector to help fund this vital work. Thank you.
Such a brilliant video. I love that. Like, again, when I watched that, I'm just like, yes, again, it makes such sense because this is what, you know, it brings everybody together. Everyone who's working, as you said in the video, you know, be it rainforests or oceans, and it's sort of, we've all been looking for a way to come together. I think so many NGOs have been fractured and squabbling over not enough money, or, you know, and this is just, it's such a wonderful thing for everybody to get on this and everybody to come together to change it globally. So we've heard about France and the exciting things going on there. What else is exciting right now, Jojo?
Gosh, so I suppose it'd be good to say a little bit more about what's been happening in France, in the sense that it's worth acknowledging that in France the whole conversation around ecocide is probably more advanced than anywhere else in the world, and that was something that's one of the things that I've sort of learned, if you like, over the last year in terms of learning about what else is going on and who else is taking this forward, and would certainly like to, you know, flag up this amazing activist that we work with, who's an associate of ours in France, who's Valérie Cabanes, because she's been, having been inspired by Polly, she'd been working with various NGOs and lawyers over the last few years to bring ecocide to the attention of the French public and of French politics. And in fact, last year in France, there were 2 attempts to discuss ecocide at the governmental level. And it wasn't accepted at either of those moments, but that actually having that discussed at that level was something that most countries have not been able to do. So that's been it's been very exciting, and it shows that the Citizens' Assembly, that the proposal that they made didn't come out of nowhere. You know, it came out of a lot of campaigning work over many years. So that's been a very exciting thing to witness. And I think it's also really important that, and actually Macron mentioned it himself, that he was the first sort of major head of state to actually describe, for example, the destruction of the Amazon rainforest as an ecocide, which he did last year. When the fires in the Amazon were very much in the media focus. And so that in itself was a very important step forward. And I think that what that little video was also trying to point out is that, you know, even the word ecocide outside of France and in most of the world is not very well known. In fact, I've spoken to people in the US who had literally never heard the word before and didn't, you know, had no idea what it might mean. So part of what we were trying to do with that was simply actually put that into the mix so that people can kind of, you know, make some kind of link with the concept of environmental destruction and crime. So, you know, homicide is to destroy a person and genocide is to destroy a people. So ecocide is to destroy an ecosystem. But as you say, there are also other places, other areas where things are moving forward. And one of those is actually Sweden, where the Swedish workers' movement recently, a couple of months ago, made an official statement that they wanted Sweden to lead on making ecocide an international crime. So, you know, it is beginning to kind of gain traction in various ways. And I think the sort of conversation is really what we're kind of bringing into play here. And so when I see sometimes, you know, comments saying, oh, President Macron will never, you know, follow up on what he's promised, it actually right now, the important thing is that he is talking about it and he is making those promises. And, you know, we're working with several small island states that are interested in moving forward on this. And when it gets to the stage where a state is prepared to actually step up and say, and actually put a proposal on the table and say, we want this to be an international crime, here's our idea of what we want it to be. At that point, you know, Macron's going to have to say, well, actually, I said I was going to champion this, so I'm kind of going to have to do that. So, you know, it's all about sort of taking that conversation and expanding that conversation. So the more people talk about it, the more, you know, the more of a difference it makes. So yeah, and I think, I mean, Zoe's seen a little bit of this kind of in action in terms of spreading that conversation, because she and I actually went to New York together last September at the time of the UN General Assembly and the Climate Summit. I wonder if you can say anything more about what was going on in New York in terms of the connections that you have with the Amazon organizations and so on.
Well, that was I mean, it was an amazing time to be there. We're in the situation we're in right now. It just was, that was such a precious time of so many different organizations coming together. So Jojo, you know, we went out there together to do some events around ecocide and spread the word around that. And wonderfully, a lot of my colleagues from the Amazon were up in New York. There was big Amazon gatherings and a lot of indigenous leaders up there who all of course, loved the idea of ecocide and came to our ecocide event and learned about that. And actually, of course, you know, loved everything that Jojo spoke about, and actually now use the term ecocide quite a lot when they're, you know, when they're speaking about what's going on in their territories, because it makes so much sense. Once you hear about ecocide and understand what it is, then you can, you know, it's very relatable to a lot of what's going on in many indigenous territories. So it was a really great time to be there, and there was a lot of marches going on. It was very powerful, didn't you think, Jojo?
Absolutely, yeah, no, absolutely.
Oh dear, Jojo might have cut out. Zach,
just going to hold on a moment and see if we can online. Am I back now?
You're back, yeah.
I did warn everyone in the household to stay off the bandwidth, but yeah, we had one amazing event where various Amazon NGOs were represented, and there was also a shaman there from Ecuador, and he made a beautiful speech after I spoke, actually, and said that what he related to so strongly was the deep connection between nature and humanity, and how making ecocide a crime reflected, you know, it kind of created a parallel with damaging people, because he said, well, for him and for his culture, if you destroy a river, for example, that is like destroying a people. You know, there's actually a very concrete and deeply, deeply felt connection that is still very, very real. And actually, I feel that that's one thing that you know, the ecocide law can do, is actually bring us a little bit more back into alignment with this concept. You know, I mean, all of our law is so anthropocentric. It's so centered around humanity and about what's wrong to do to other people. And that's not to say that that's not important, but we seem to somehow forget that we're not separate from the world in which we live. And actually, you know, we can't just carry on exhausting resources and not taking into account our own part in the world around us. And what he said really sort of resonated in that way for me. I mean, I wonder whether you could say a bit more about what it was like actually, you know, living with those indigenous cultures where that is such a strong part of their way of being.
Yeah, I mean, for me, you know, it was a real awakening experience. Obviously, I lived with the Actuar, and also Domingo, who you met, is an Actuar leader, and you know, that idea that you know, nature and humanity are one. We are, you know, we are. There's no. They don't see a division between humanity and nature. They don't see that the animals are separate from us and the trees and the rivers, as you previously said. And so every action that you take is conscious of that. And I think that's so different for us in the Western world, because we can get awakened and but it's sort of quite an effort to become conscious of everything we do. Whereas the indigenous way of being, it's like there's really no I in team as well. There's also a real understanding of community and how what I do will affect, you know, my family, my neighbors, and those neighbors and family are the trees, the jaguars, the water source. So there's always that consciousness in everything that they do. And for me, that was such a wake up. And so I think when they heard about, you know, the ecocide, it's like, yes, of course, because it's always been that way to them. You know, it's sort of, that's why the pain when I was with, living with one community, and they were telling me about shaman particularly they'll work in particular areas, and they'll have a very particular connection with certain animal spirits or tree spirits. And, you know, the cutting down of a sacred tree that is connected to a shaman in one of the Quito territories I work in, that when that tree was cut down by an oil company doing seismic testing, the shaman, his wife and his son all died straight afterwards. And that might seem bizarre to us, but that is the strength of the belief, and that is the strength of the connection with the people and the forest, you know, and that's the same. You hear it again and again and again in indigenous cultures. It's not an idea, it's a reality, that deep, deep connection. So that was murder, cutting down that tree. It was a sacred tree because 3 people did die due to it, you know, and whether it's, you know, their beliefs making that happen, it's true for them and it's real for them. And, you know, and so that's why it's just so heartbreaking when you see, you know, the contamination that I've seen in the north of Ecuador, in the case of the Chevron case. You know, it's inconceivable to an indigenous person to contaminate the earth and the land. And it's utterly heartbreaking to them. I mean, they lose their pharmacy, they lose their hardware store, they lose their, you know, they got, you know, their food, everything when that's contaminated. So, you know, it's all precious to them. And, you know, and so that's, I think, and it's interesting because Minari, who I sent you a video of him, a dear friend of mine who's a Sapara shaman, when he understood the concept of ecocide. Now, every time he speaks now, he includes it because it's like, this is what we've been trying to tell you people. And I think that the ecocide laws are so great because it's you know, it's in a way that we in the West can understand the indigenous way of being and the way of looking at the earth. And it's really exciting. And I think that everyone who came to New York, and it sort of went around all the community, they were like, well done, you're catching up. Because they always say to me, you know, you in the West, you're living in a dream world. Like, we are awakened here. We've you know, they're connected with nature at all times. And we should be too, but we've just forgotten it. You know, so that was like, they were like, finally, you know, you people are waking up, you know, you're catching up with us. And I think that's why I think this is so exciting, because I feel the shift is happening.
Yeah, I feel that too. It really feels like you know, the time is now, you know, and would that it had been earlier. But when it comes down to it, you know, humans are kind of crazy like that. It's like we have to be, it seems, we have to be kind of right on the brink of something, certainly in the Western world, before we'll actually take it on board. And, you know, one of the things, it was funny, we've just brought out these new little flyers. So you can see there, you've got a little contrast between this, and this is actually the result. This is actually where Zoe was talking about in the north of Ecuador, and the damage to the forest, and, you know, obviously where we intend to restore the possibility of, you know, as actually how the forest should look. And I think also there's such a sense that, you know, this is a time of, you know, it's great. It's hugely tragic what's been happening, but there's also this sense of sort of possibility that I think has partly come with this horrific pandemic, because what we've seen is that the world is capable of changing its habits very quickly when it needs to, and that governments can act quickly when they need to. And I think the other thing that I find very encouraging is that you know, there are so many solutions out there, and there are so many things that we can learn from the indigenous people, and also from you know, people who are at the kind of leading edge of new technologies and new ways of doing things that are actually in harmony with nature. But it feels almost as if, you know, there's this extra push that isn't quite there in terms of the way that corporations operate. And you know, we're now starting to see ecocide law as that push, you know, as that missing ingredient, because, you know, when you listen to people like, you know, William McDonough on the cradle to cradle stuff, Ellen MacArthur on circular economy, Kate Raworth on donut economics, you know, all of these sort of arenas, you know, all of the things that we need to move to a world that does operate in harmony, we have those things. Yeah. Those things are present, but at the moment, all the funds are still flowing in the old direction. You know, they're still going, you know, there's still billions in subsidies going to fossil fuel companies, you know, so, you know, those guys are still going to continue doing what they're doing until they're told they can't. And this always brings to mind for me a particular little anecdote that Polly told me, and this was from before I knew her, probably around the time that she maybe met you, where she was talking about, she was actually in a conversation with the head of a bank in the UK, and she was saying, you know, why is it that you continue to fund this dangerous industrial activity? You know, why do you continue to put funds into it? And the head of the bank just kind of looked at her and said, it's not a crime. And it's like, you know, that's it. You know, it's as simple as that. And Valérie Cabanas in France has said to me, she has spoken to a number of audiences of business people and CEOs who've been in tears hearing about the law of ecocide, because actually it's killing them to be doing what they have to do, what they're legally obliged to do for their shareholders, rather than what they know to be the right thing to do, because the tool, the legal parameters are not there to stop them doing that, and their funders and their investors are saying, no, you can do that because that's not illegal and that's going to be the quickest way to make money. And so really what we're kind of feeling is that it's time for, you know, not just, you know, for ordinary people to say, we want this in place. For those people who are suffering, those people who are at the sharp end of it, whether that's at the sharp end of climate change in the Pacific Islands, whether that's at the sharp end of ecocide in the Amazon and the sort of direct ecocides like in Nigeria, for example, or at the tar sands, there's so many places. You know, it's not just those people, it's also the businesses, it's also the corporations. They need to be saying, you know, we need this tool because we need, you know, the innovation's there, the ingenuity is there, the solutions are there. It's just a question of, you know, closing the door to the bad stuff and actually saying, no, right, this is now where all the money has to flow. And so, you know, it seems to me like, you know, there is a way in which we can, you know, everybody can come with us on this. This is not something where, you know, I mean, obviously, don't get me wrong, and I'm sure that Zoe will probably second this, you know, as an activist, there are a few CEOs I wouldn't mind seeing in the dock. But when it comes down to it, it's not actually about revenge. It's about changing the practices. It's about stopping the harm.
Absolutely. I mean, I totally agree. And I think it's like, you know, they are aware, and they are, you know, many of the Chevron executives I like to have stern words with, but I think it's, you know, providing them, you know, what they're, you know, an easy way out in a, you know, not easy way out, but providing them an alternative. And I think that so many people, you know, when you speak to people personally, you know, at, you know, over a coffee or not in, you know, not in a business meeting, they will say to you, and many have said to me, you know, I would love to be doing something different, but I have, you know, 400 people working for me, 2,000 people working for me. It's a machine that they can't change. And if they do, then they have to drop out completely. And I've actually had conversations with people who have considered that when they have woken up to the impact. And I lead trips into the Amazon to stay with different indigenous communities, and often I have, business leaders come, and seeing them, sitting there, drinking chicha with indigenous people in the middle of the jungle, and seeing them wake up, and listening to these wise, beautiful indigenous people, and you see them go, I want to change, I want to do things differently. And it's like, but it's so hard for them to do that. Many of them have when they've gone back, and obviously they are interested enough to go on a trip to the Amazon. But, this provides them, it shows people how they can do things, they can change on, on a business level, on a huge level. So I think, so what do you think, thinking about Polly yesterday and her birthday, what do you think, if she was here today, what do you think she'd be saying about all this progress and where we are now and how far you've come?
I think she'd be absolutely delighted. I think whether she'd be saying this publicly or not, I don't know, but I'm sure she'd be thinking, I told you so.
Totally.
But at the same time, I also think she kind of knew. I think she did, and actually one of the things she said to me in the last week, and this was particularly during her last week of life, because it was the week of the April Rebellion in the UK, where Extinction Rebellion took over London, and it was the first time that she had seen, and you saw a glimpse of it in the little video with all the people sitting with the Stop Ecocide placards on the Mall on this big street in London. It was the first time she had seen the call that she had been making taken to the streets by ordinary people, and that phrase, the Stop Ecocide, and the word ecocide being there on the street. I remember her kind of looking at me, and from her bed she was in a hospice at that point, and saying, Jojo, it's all going to happen now. It's all going to happen now. And there was this extraordinary sense of I mean, it really felt like almost like, that was what she needed to see before she left. And there was this extraordinary moment actually on the last day of the rebellion when Greta Thunberg was literally about to take the stage in London, lovely woman who works with us, Anita, had suggested contacting the Extinction Rebellion leaders and saying, Polly's not going to be very long for this world, and they said that they would announce this that evening, and literally within a few minutes Polly actually passed away. And I just had such a strong feeling. It was almost like, I almost felt like, she's like, wow, they're going to announce me in London. I want to be there. And and it was like she chose that exact moment, so that by the time it came to speaking about her, they were actually saying, she's gone. And the power of that was actually extraordinary, because, right across London, and, and of course all the publicity that happened as a result of that, it really kind of sparked something. And there was something hugely powerful about that. So, there's a part of me, obviously there's a part of me that really misses her and misses her as my mate. And, we used to throw these incredible fancy dress parties every year. And, we had so much fun together. It was both deadly serious and hugely hilarious working with her. And she was just amazing. But things moved so fast that I think it was 3 months before I actually had a chance to properly kind of cry about it, if you like. But at the same time, I can't help this sort of nagging feeling that she knows exactly what's going on. And, it really wouldn't surprise me if she had a hand in it somewhere, It does kind of very, very much feels like, her spirit is with us. It'd be nice to perhaps bring in a bit of poetry here, because I was asked actually I can't remember exactly when it was now, 2 or 3 months ago. There's a group called Culture Declares Rebellion, which is I think based in the UK, but may well have people joining from elsewhere as well. But they put together something called Letters to the Earth last year, which a bit of Polly's work was included in. And then this year they put some little videos together and invited some poetry. And we used to, Polly she always spent time in nature. And that was something that she kind of really sort of gave me this habit of always going and grounding every single day, always going and putting your bare feet on the earth. And I can promise you that when it's snowy, you know, I don't stay out for very long, but I always do it. But yeah, always touching your feet to the ground. And she was always very, I remember having a conversation with her about dandelions, because she always loved dandelions, you know, these little suns. And it's interesting, actually, I just recently read a fantastic book that's just come out in the UK by Jonathan Porritt called Hope in Hell, where he talks about addressing the climate emergency over the next 10 years. And I noticed that the cover has got this dandelion breaking through concrete. And it made me think again of this, of what Polly had always, you know, said about dandelions, that they were so beautiful and that they weren't weeds. Anyway, so I ended up sort of writing a little bit of a poem about that, and put it together for Culture Declares Emergency. So I don't know if you'd like to quickly play that one for us, Zach. It's just a bit of a vibe of Polly, really.
Dear Dandelion, you are often considered a weed, yet you are so joyously bright, like a small sun. Your leaves feed and heal. You are phenomenally strong and persistent enough to break through concrete, and, having so many seeds so easily distributed, irrepressible. Dear Dandelion, I imagine a future where the principles by which the world operates are golden rules. First, do no harm. Care for all life. Seek joy. Dear Dandelion, if our deepest compass points to that future, it's the one we'll bring into being. We can be like you, joyful, bright, healing, persistent, stronger than concrete, irrepressible, so very many of us.
That's so beautiful, Jojo.
Oh, thank you.
So beautiful.
Thanks, Zach, for giving us the opportunity for that one. That was lovely. And yeah, I don't know, is there anything that you feel like wrapping up with, Zoe? I don't know if we've got any questions from anyone, or if we just, you know, leave it there. I feel like we've covered quite a lot. Oh, we do have questions. Oh, Zach says we've got some questions.
I apologise, I didn't put them in the chat box, so you're blissfully unaware.
Sorry.
But it's been so amazing, guys. I mean, you've covered a lot of ground in a short period of time, and you know, I think I speak for everyone. We're feeling incredibly inspired about the potential of the future. You know, given today's news and everything you guys are doing, you know, and it's not a case of what we can do and what we're capable of. It's a case of political will primarily, you know, and it's a lot of what I've been working on recently. And Annie Leonard showed the story of plastic live a little while ago, and it was incredibly and awe-inspiring. But however much we all want to try and contribute, until the system change and policy change, it's almost impossible, because we're in a system that is systemically just corrupted, right? So the work you're doing is so fundamental. So thank you both. I could converse with you for a long time. But I'll ask Annie's question, because it's amazing. We can bring it on screen here. So as individual citizens, how can we hold Macron accountable to his pledge? And how can we apply pressure or have our say to other G7 country leaders to do the same?
Okay, so I would say that the key thing here is about, well, there's a couple of things. The key one is about talking about it. And in all your networks, you know, with any environmental groups you work with, and, you know, particularly if you're if you're actually, involved with an NGO or an environmental group, starting to use the word ecocide and, you know, reiterate this term, so that becomes a wave, if you like. It becomes a wave that everybody starts to talk about, and it becomes a demand to governments. So I think that, you know, the quickest way that we can spread this is actually via all of those organisations that all have their own different arenas. I mean, we touched on this a little bit in the video earlier. you know, it is to get everybody to add this as part of what they're asking for. So you may be saving the chimpanzees, but you also want to support a crime of ecocide because it will help save the chimpanzees. You may be wanting to reduce plastic pollution. And again, putting a crime of ecocide in place will have that industry, the waste industry, the production industries, think about what they're doing so that they don't fall foul of that. So it's really it's a question of kind of adding it as an additional request or demand in everything that we talk about when we talk about the environment. So it's really kind of underlining the fact that this is a foundational piece. And so, there is that. And then, of course, there's the direct joining the campaign. Obviously we'd say, go to stopecocide.earth, sign up as an earth protector. We're actually quite soon, we're gradually getting more and more sites internationally, but we're actually going to be starting up our own international petition soon, where you can go and sign up. It'll be almost a two-stage thing. You can sign up to support a crime of ecocide, and you can also join and potentially contribute funds as well and actually become a declared earth protector. I think it's also worth adding here, because we didn't really cover this so much in the conversation earlier, that there's a kind of additional bonus with signing up as an earth protector at our website. And this was a really ingenious thing that Polly did. She basically came up with this extra support for activists on which the campaign is based, because the document that you sign when you sign up, effectively you're signing a sort of statement that says you believe ecocide should be a crime, and that all species have the right to peaceful enjoyment, and that anything that disturbs that seriously is a crime. And effectively that document has been legally rubber stamped, if you like. It's called apostilled, actually, right across the world. So when you join the campaign, when you actually sign up as an earth protector, you then have that document in your own personal name, signed by you electronically, and that's actually valid in a court of law. So and this goes along with this whole concept that you may have come across possibly within Extinction Rebellion or the protest movements, who have started to use this terminology, but it was coined by Polly. And it's this concept of conscientious protectors. That environmental activists who are taking peaceful action, are not criminals. They are conscientious protectors, and that taps into the kind of narrative of conscientious objectors who didn't want to go to war because they saw that as a harm they wanted no part of. And the activists of today who are trying to stand up for the rights of the earth and to protect nature, they are protectors, not protesters. And that is something that, sort of as the concept of protectors, water protectors, earth protectors, and so on, has already been taken up very much within, I think, the environmental activist community. But, to add this level of conscience kind of allows you, let's say, an activist is arrested and they end up in a criminal court for their action, they have the ability to produce this document and to give it as proof that they're acting not to cause harm, but to prevent it. Now, that doesn't actually guarantee them a certain outcome of the trial, but we have had activists use it, and in fact, judges give very lenient sentences as a result. So, so there is a kind of additional bonus to that as well for activists. And I think, again, this is so much about the narrative. It's so much about reframing what people are doing. Because right now, in some ways, our law is kind of upside down. I'm not committing a crime, whereas the people who are standing up against them and standing up for protecting the earth are labelled criminals, and that needs to change. And this whole concept of conscientious protection, I think, goes a long way to sort of addressing that, in that it just has you realise that these are people acting unconscious of what they believe is right. And I think that brings us again back to how this law is such a moral issue. I think I rambled a bit there, but I hope it was interesting.
You did not ramble whatsoever. In fact, Annie just said, you can see here how grateful she is. Fantastic answer. Thank you, Jojo. Yeah. So, there you go, to summarise. And we've got another great one, which is quite relevant, and it's actually something that I was wanting to ask. So we'll bring this one in, which is, what is next in terms of the UK discussions and citizen parliaments?
Oh, okay. I'm not sure I'm actually the best person to answer that. You probably need to get in touch with the Extinction Rebellion spokespeople on that side of things. Now there has been a what they've been coming up with is nothing like as radical as what the French Citizens Assembly came up with a couple of weeks ago. I do believe that there was a strong move towards, ensuring a green recovery from COVID, which is actually now backed by a lot of people and a lot of different sectors of society across the world. But I have to say that the UK is not our primary hopeful nation, I suppose. I'm not quite sure how to say this. We don't think it's a primary candidate for supporting an international crime of ecocide. They're certainly not taking it forward. I mean, we did a petition, last summer asking the UK government to criminalise ecocide. Now, all the petitions last year, of course, fell at the general election, so they got cancelled. But we did have an official answer from the UK government, and it was, the UK government does not recognise the term ecocide, nor does it have any intention to criminalise it. So this was it was actually a bit rich coming from the UK government, given that the UK actually were perfectly aware of the concept of ecocide, because they were involved in the discussions in the 1990s that led to the Rome Statute online here. But yeah, so the UK was well aware, because they were involved in the discussions around environmental crime in the Rome Statute before it became the the document that created the International Criminal Court, and they actually had a hand in preventing, as far as we understand it, preventing that crime from reaching the final draft. Now, that could show a number of things. It could show that the UK government is hugely disingenuous, or it could just show that there's no continuity between governments, which may also be the case. So sorry, that's not a hugely encouraging answer, I realise. But when the UK sees other people moving, exactly, we can hope for more action, and of course it's no reason not to make the conversation as loud here as it is anywhere else, because let's face it, I mean, Extinction Rebellion achieved what looked like the impossible, and had the UK be the first government to declare climate emergency. So amazing things can happen, and in fact are in the process of happening. So we're always optimistic.
Yeah, I mean, for me, it seems so clear that what we need above all is this kind of shift in perspective, or shift in values of what we value in life, right? What we're striving for. I would call it more of a renaissance of the human soul. But Gustav Speth frames it really beautifully when he's like, I thought biodiversity loss, ecosystem collapse, and extinction of species was the biggest issue the planet faces, and good science could resolve this. But really, the biggest issue that the planet faces is kind of greed and apathy, and our unwillingness to change. And it was amazing, to realize that what we need is a cultural and spiritual transformation above all. When we shift our views on what's, particularly people in government, and shift their views, and people are fighting for it, then hopefully that's how we can avert things. That's kind of medicine's view. So we need the people like you doing the real work and changing policies and being such advocates. So thank you so much to both of you for joining us today.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. It's been such a pleasure.
And so I've got the links here. So, of course, you've seen this pop up lots. Stop Ecocide, the website there if you want to donate, or you guys want to support or sign up or become Earth Protectors. I know I'm going to actually get that legal documentation that you just said. That sounds incredibly valuable. And Jojo, Zoe, I don't know if this is the right site. Zoe Tryon, if people want to follow up on what you're up to and where you're at, and of course can find you on Instagram and whatnot also. So thank you so much, guys. I look forward to staying aligned with what you're doing and hearing about all the new exciting developments. Thank you.
Oh, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Blessings.